Hello and welcome to Bright Wings, children's books to make the heart soar. I am your host, Charity Hill. The purpose of this conversation is to help mothers and fathers identify books that will liberate their children to embrace truth, goodness, and beauty. More than a year ago, I told you about how I'd taken a job teaching 11th grade humanities and history. I had wild hopes that I'd be able to podcast about the books and texts I was reading with my 16 and 17-year-old students. Now, any one of you who has ever taught or been a first-year teacher knows why I didn't manage it. And so, though I did not produce a ton of podcasts in my first year of teaching, I poured into my students and galvanized them around 13 very challenging texts. They're only juniors in high school, but we really were reading college-level texts and novels. We read Virgil's Aeneid, the Oresteia, Plato's Republic, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, the Gospel of John, Augustine's Confessions, Richard II and Henry V by William Shakespeare. We read Aquinas' Questions on Happiness from the Summa. Those were great days. We read Happiness and Contemplation by Pieper. We read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And we finished with Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And friends, we're not reading excerpts. We're reading the full text. Amazing. And I've done it again. I'm doing it again this year. And I can't even tell you how incredible it is to encounter these texts anew and deeper this time around, now that I've read them so thoroughly already just a year ago. And I haven't forgotten that some of you reached out to me and asked to be included in this journey that I was undergoing, this journey of reading these texts and encountering them in this community of readers in my classroom. But after teaching all last year, it was so hard for me to come home, even when I had, an hour of reading to do to prepare for class or more, and come up with the emotional wherewithal to podcast about it. So I hope you will forgive me and take me back, because what I want to do today is I want to share with you Virgil's Aeneid. I want to talk to you about it. Some of you are reading the Aeneid this month or this year. If you haven't read it ever, or you haven't read it in a long time and you're freaked out by perhaps reading the Aeneid, I want to get you psyched. I want you to be convinced that this is something you can do because, my friends, 16 and 17-year-olds in Mrs. Hill's class can do it. And B, you can do it because it is so beautiful. It is so marvelous. It is really worth undertaking it. So as part of my pep talk, I want to tell you that when I started podcasting, I was freaked out. I wanted to do it and I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to fail at it. And my big hangup was actually the tech part. And so I would secretly encourage myself by saying inside myself, come on, Charity, you can do this. Teenagers in their rooms can do this. Teenagers in their rooms faff around on GarageBand and make podcasts. You can do it. So I'm telling you, friends, teenagers in their bedrooms are reading the Aeneid. You can do it. You can do it too. You really can. So let's get started. I'm going to go through the Aeneid book by book. It doesn't have chapters. It has books and lines. We're going to go through it book by book, and I am going to tell you some of the great questions that I talked about with my students and point out to you some of the more notable features. Just before I get started, of course, like a big nerd, I have to say something about translation. Really, if you have a copy, just read it. If you are getting a hold of a copy, I would recommend either the Fitzgerald translation, which I read at the University of Dallas as a freshman, or I would recommend the Fagles translation. That's the one I'm using with my class. Robert Fagles, Fagles. It's published by Penguin Classics. It has all kinds of lovely notes on the back that help you understand when a character or a myth is referred to, what it is talking about. So it gives you backstory on lots of details on persons, myths, circumstances, objects, what they all are and mean. Just a word on the background of Virgil. We know that he was born into a non-noble family, and he was educated in Cremona, Milan, and then Rome. He was educated in Greek and Roman literature and philosophy. Now, most educated Romans were steeped in the Iliad and the Odyssey, and these were their texts for teaching, for reading, for memorization, for writing, for learning rhetoric. Octavian Augustus Caesar was Virgil's patron, and it was under him that Virgil wrote the Aeneid, sort of for him in a particular way. Virgil composed it during a high point of Roman Empire. Large amounts of territory had been conquered and were being held peacefully. There was no civil war. Rome felt powerful and significant for being not Greek but Roman. This was something distinctive, being Roman. So this epic reflects the distinctive identity of Roman excellence. The Aeneid's gorgeous musical quality, its intricacy, its diction, these features become the text from which Romans were to be educated. So the Aeneid becomes the new text. That's the source of education and writing and rhetoric for the next generations of Romans. We're going to see, in fact, as well, how famous and important writers were steeped in the Aeneid. Augustine of Hippo and Dante Alighieri, for example. Now, I am not an expert in ancient history. I'm not a Virgil expert. There are other writers and podcasters, perhaps, that would give you greater detail and insight than me. My job in this podcast, I think, is to help you get excited and about the Aeneid and to know that it's possible for you to appreciate it and read it and encounter it in a way that transforms your life. One of the beautiful things that Virgil does as he opens the Aeneid is he does what is called, he opens in media res. That is Latin for in the middle of things. He throws us into the sea with Aeneas. It opens kind of mid-drama. Troy has already fallen, and we haven't even heard about that yet. We're just tossed into the sea with Aeneas, who's on a ship with his men and fighting a storm that has been stirred up by his great enemy, Juno, the queen of the gods. These are the first 8 lines. Wars and a man I sing, an exile driven on by fate. He was the first to flee the coast of Troy, destined to reach Lavinian shores and Italian soil. Yet many blows he took on land and sea from the gods above, thanks to cruel Juno's relentless rage. And many losses he bore in battle, too, before he could found a city, bring his gods to Latium, source of the Latin race, the Alban lords, and the high walls of Rome. Now, Virgil, on purpose, is setting himself up to sound just like his hero, Homer, who wrote the Iliad. The Iliad is the epic story of the battle over the city of Troy, because Helen was taken there, and it's the war concerning Helen and the city of Troy. Now, the opening lines of the Iliad, that on which Virgil wants to model his Aeneid, go like this. The Iliad begins, "Rage, goddess, sing the rage of Peleus' son Achilles, murderous, doomed, that cost the Achaeans countless losses, hurling down to the house of death so many sturdy souls, great fighters' souls, but made their bodies carrion, feasts for the dogs and birds. And the will of Zeus was moving toward its end. Begin, muse, when the first two broke and clashed, Agamemnon, lord of men, and brilliant Achilles." And Virgil would have also had Homer's other epic in mind. So, of course, he had the Iliad in mind because it involves the fate of a city, the fate of a people. So he would have had that in mind because he's telling the story of the Roman people. But he's also telling the story of the Roman people through the tale of a single man, Aeneas. And so Virgil also wants to make his story resemble the story of Odysseus, the man who is seeking and searching and fighting his way home again. And so he models his beginning also on the Odyssey. The first 8 lines of the Odyssey are these: "Sing to me of the man, muse, the man of twists and turns, driven time and again off course, whence he had plundered the hallowed heights of Troy. Many cities of men he saw, and learned their minds. Many pains he suffered, heart-sick on the open sea, fighting to save his life and bring his comrades home. But he could not save them from disaster, hard as he strove. The recklessness of their own ways destroyed them all, the blind fools. They devoured the cattle of the sun, and the sun god blotted out the day of their return." So Virgil sets out his beginning to call to the mind of his hearers and readers the beginning of these other great epics, the great epic scope of the city and the fate of a people, as well as the fate of a single man. So why does the Aeneid open with this storm at sea? It's caused, as we've heard, by Juno, who hates Aeneas. Why? In fact, it's nothing Aeneas has done, really. Aeneas is pious Aeneas. He's devoted to the gods. But Juno is still burning with resentment over what's called the judgment of Paris. Poor Paris. Sorta. Paris, from Troy, was so handsome he attracted the notice of the goddesses, who wanted him to judge whether Hera, Venus, or Minerva was the most beautiful goddess. Venus tells Paris that if he picks her, she'll give him the most beautiful woman in the world. Unfortunately, the most beautiful woman in the world is Helen, who's married to Menelaus. Doesn't matter, though. Paris picks Venus. Venus gives Helen to Paris. They go back to Troy, and Menelaus rounds up everybody to go make war on Troy to get his wife back. Sorry for the casual summary, but perhaps that's helpful, right? Hera does not forgive this. She's happy to see Troy burn, and she hates Aeneas because, in fact, Venus is his mother. Aeneas hasn't done anything to Hera, but she still hates him because his mother won the prize. So, though Aeneas is fated to found Rome, Hera is going to make it her continuous mission throughout the Aeneid to try to thwart his destiny, to delay it, and to make it as full of suffering as possible. The other reason why she wants to thwart and delay and cause suffering to Aeneas and to anything connected with the founding of Rome is because she also knows that her favorite city, Carthage, is one day going to be conquered by the Roman Empire. When Aeneas first speaks in Book 1, it's as he is suffering this heinous storm sent by Hera. He's wishing he'd died nobly with a community of good men and worthy enemies, rather than face his death by drowning. He wishes that he had died in a more glorious and meaningful way. He says, he lifts his palms toward the stars and cries out, 4 times blessed, my comrades, lucky to die beneath the soaring walls of Troy, before their parents' eyes. If only I'd gone down under your right hand, Diomedes, strongest Greek afield, and poured out my life on the battlegrounds of Troy, where raging Hector lies, pierced by Achilles' spear, where mighty Sarpedon lies, where the Simois river swallows down and churns beneath its tides so many shields and helmets and corpses of the brave. And so they fight their way through. They had just left land, and when this storm strikes them, and they make for land again, and they fight through, and finally they land on a beach and set up a camp. And in another passage at line 233 or so, Aeneas says, my comrades, hardly strangers to pain before now, we have all weathered worse. Some god will grant us an end to this as well. You've threaded the rocks, resounding with Scylla's howling rabid dogs, and taken the brunt of the Cyclops' boulders too. Call up your courage again. Dismiss your grief and fear. A joy it will be one day, perhaps, to remember even this. Through so many hard straits, so many twists and turns, our course holds firm for Latium. There fate holds out a homeland, calm and peace. There the gods decree the kingdom of Troy will rise again. Bear up. Save your strength for better times to come. Brave words. Sick with mounting cares, he assumes a look of hope and keeps his anguish buried in his heart. So we have Aeneas being shown as this marvelous warrior who is a leader of his people. He conceals his own heartbreak and speaks brave words to encourage his men. Later on in book 1, around 367, line 367, Aeneas stays up all night. He worries. But Aeneas, duty bound, the text reads, his mind restless with worries all that night, reached a firm resolve as the fresh day broke. He goes out to seek some of his lost men to see if maybe they landed on shore apart from where they landed. Aeneas, as you will see, is continually concerned with the welfare of his people. And as he's out exploring, he meets with his mother, only she has disguised herself looking like a extremely attractive local girl. And it's notable that the motherhood of Venus is distant. She appears to him several times and she helps him at different intervals, but her motherhood is quite distant. In fact, all the time when she is appearing to him, there are overtones of sexiness rather than warmth and motherly affection. Nevertheless, she gives him intelligence that he has landed near Carthage and that Dido is highly available. That Dido is a beautiful, wealthy queen, in fact, and highly sought after by the men of the surrounding lands. When Aeneas approaches Carthage, it's doing all the things the great and powerful city is doing, building a theater, dredging a harbor, laying foundations, quarrying rocks for great columns, drafting laws, electing judges, having a senate, plowing out their boundaries. She causes an enchantment to kind of cloak Aeneas in until he gets right up to the throne of Dido. And then he is revealed. And he is revealed as being stunningly handsome, enhanced by the goddess's powers. Dido gives him a lovely, friendly, noble welcome. And Aeneas's words to her in the end are going to be terribly ironic. He greets her with this wonderfully, almost innocent blessing. He says, "But may the gods, if there are powers who still respect the good and true, if justice still exists on the face of the earth, may they in their own sense of right and wrong bring you your just rewards." We are going to see that poor Dido gets nothing like her just rewards. Yet Dido is well fitted to understand Aeneas, for she has suffered. Her husband was killed, and she had to flee because I believe it's her uncle is after her wealth and her power. She's making a very successful go of it, ruling Carthage. And yet she has the maturity and beauty to say to Aeneas, "Schooled in suffering, now I learn to comfort those who suffer too." They help them rebuild their ships, they outfit them, they feed them, and entertain them in Carthage, Aeneas and his men. While this is going on, Dido begs Aeneas to tell her the story of the fall of Troy. Can the goddesses leave this alone? No, of course not. Venus intervenes because what she's after is securing her son's future and the future of Rome. And so she sends Cupid to cause Dido to fall incredibly in love with Aeneas. She wants to make Dido her, quote, ally in arms. So Venus sends her son Cupid, who is thoroughly a god, he looks just like Aeneas' son Ascanius. And Ascanius hugs both Aeneas and Dido and sort of passes the love between them. Now, all of this is in spite of the fact that Dido has sworn a vow not to marry and not to love again. And yet, as Aeneas tells the tragic story of Troy, Dido falls more and more in love with him. Book 1 concludes with Dido urging Aeneas to tell his story. She says, "Wait, come, my guest." She urges, tell us your own story, start to finish. The ambush laid by the Greeks, the pain your people suffered, the wanderings you have faced. For now is the 7th summer that has borne you wandering all the lands and seas on earth. In Book 2, we have Aeneas narrate the final hours of Troy. In the opening lines of Book 2, it is as if we are part of the audience, listening to Aeneas. It says that there was silence. All fell hushed, their eyes fixed on Aeneas now, as the founder of his people set out on his story. Sorrow, unspeakable sorrow, my queen, you ask me to bring to life once more. How the Greeks uprooted Troy in all her power. Our kingdom mourned forever. What horrors I saw. A tragedy where I played a leading role myself. Who could tell such things? Not even a Myrmidon, a Dolopian, or a comrade of iron-hearted Ulysses. And still refrain from tears? He says that not the toughest men could tell this story and not cry, not weep. And here in Book 2 of the Aeneid is where we have an extended telling of the Trojan horse as being the cause of the fall of Troy in the end. The Trojan horse is really only mentioned much more in passing in the Iliad and in the Odyssey and in a few other fragmentary ways. We have images of the Trojan horse on vases, but it is here in the Aeneid that we have the telling of the Trojan horse given it in an extended way. Aeneas says that Aeneas says that Minerva helps the Greeks to build the Trojan horse, in which they hide their best warriors. The Greeks pretend to give up the siege and sail away, but they only sail away just around the corner. The horse is filled with armed men. And the Trojans have a conversation about what to do with it, whether to take it into the city or not. It seems to be a conciliating gift for Pallas, for Minerva. The text says that the common people are split into warring factions over this horse. And in fact, one argues, trust me, either the Greeks are hiding shut inside those beams, or the horse is a battle engine geared to breach our walls, spy on our homes, come down on our city, overwhelm us, or some other deceptions lurking deep inside it. Trojans, never trust that horse. Whatever it is, I fear the Greeks, especially bearing gifts. And the speaker here is Laocoon. And in that spirit and with that fury, he flings a spear into the horse, which makes the men in the horse groan. But Aeneas says it's as if the fates and our own wits had gone against us. For suddenly, in the thick of it all, a prisoner is brought in. Some shepherds have found a deserter, supposedly, a deserter of the Greeks, and they bring him bound before the people outside the walls of Troy, where the Trojan horse is waiting. The captured fellow's name is Sinon, Sinon, Sinon. Maybe you would say it's Sinon. And Sinon captures them with his story. He says that he had fallen out of favor with the Greeks and that he was chosen sort of by lot to become a human sacrifice, and that he escaped from becoming a human sacrifice and hid out. He says he hates the Greeks as much as the Trojans hate them. He says, if you think all Greeks are one, if hearing the name Greek is enough for you, it's high time you made me pay the price. How that would please the man of Ithaca, Ulysses, how the sons of Atreus would repay you. Essentially, repay you for killing me. Check out that rhetoric. If you want to make the Greeks happy, well then kill me, says Sinon. And Aeneas tells his audience, he wept and won his life, our pity too. Priam takes command and has him freed from the ropes and chains that bind him fast and hails him warmly, whoever you are, from now on, now you've lost the Greeks. Put them out of your mind, and you'll be one of us. But answer my questions. Tell me the whole truth. Why did they raise up this giant monstrous horse? Who conceived it? What's it for? Its purpose? Poor Priam. Poor Priam. He's too good. He's too good. He asks this trickster for the truth, the one who is going to betray. How does Sinon respond to Priam's request for the truth? With a lie. He said, "Bear witness, you eternal fires of the sky, and you inviolate will of the gods. Bear witness, altar, and those infernal knives that I escape." So he's calling on all these holy things. "No laws of my native land can bind me here. Just keep your promise, Troy, that if I can save you, you must save me too. If I reveal the truth and pay you back in full." Oh no, pay you back in full. So Sinon lies, and his lie is that Calchas, the priest of the Greeks, has said they must go back to Greece and offer sacrifice, and they must leave this horse as a sacrifice to Minerva, to Pallas, to atone for their violation of her statue. He says, essentially, if you treat this horse well, it's going to guard your city, and Pallas is going to guard your city. And Aeneas narrates, "Trapped by his craft, that cunning liar Sinon, we believed his story. His tears, his treachery seized the men, whom neither Tydeus' son nor Achilles could defeat, nor 10 long years of war, nor all the 1,000 ships." We see incredibly that lies and treachery and a story defeated Troy that Achilles could not destroy. Unfortunately, out of the sea come 2 huge giant twin serpents, and they go after Laocoon and his sons, who are sacrificing a bull. And because snakes are symbols of Minerva, it is understood to be a punishment to Laocoon, because Laocoon threw the spear into the belly of the horse. And so Laocoon and his sons are crushed to death by these snakes, and it's seen as a punishment for his violation of this horse. So they bring the Trojan horse in honor of Minerva into the city of Troy to offer up prayers to the power of the goddess. And they celebrate into the night, the end of the war. And then when they're heavy with wine and deep in sleep, what happens? Well, Aeneas is awakened by the ghost of Hector, who appears to Aeneas in the marred and harmed form that that we last saw him in, which was after he had been killed and dragged by Achilles. He urges Aeneas to leave the city, that if a single man could have saved Troy, it would have been him. And so Aeneas, he urges him. He says, "If one strong arm could have saved Troy, my arm would have saved the city. Now, into your hands, she entrusts her holy things, her household gods. Take them with you as comrades in your fortunes. Seek a city for them. Once you have roved the sea, erect great walls at last to house the gods of Troy." Urging so, with his own hands, he carries Vesta forth from her inner shrine, her image clad in ribbons, filled with her power, her everlasting fire. And then Aeneas realizes that the sounds of chaos are upon the city. And in this telling of the destruction of Troy, there is not the same kind of mutual respect for the enemy that we see in the Iliad. In the Iliad, students of the Iliad read it and they admire the Greeks, and then they take a turn and they admire the Trojans, and they can't hardly decide which side they prefer to win. Homer is a Greek poet, and yet he makes the Trojans out to be extremely admirable. In fact, one of the most likable characters in the Iliad. So appealing. Many of them are Trojans. Hector and his wife Andromache and their son are so noble and warm and appealing. But now in the Aeneid, the story is being told from the Trojan perspective, and Virgil does not paint the Greeks, the invading Greeks, admirably. A close reading of Book 2 will horrify you. I just want to point out a few of those moments. We pity Cassandra. The text says, "Watch, the virgin daughter of Priam, Cassandra, torn from the sacred depths of Minerva's shrine, dragged by the hair, raising her burning eyes to the heavens. Just her eyes, so helpless. Shackles kept her from raising her gentle hands." Pitiable Cassandra, who's never believed, who's cursed, that her prophecies will be ignored. And right at Minerva's shrine again, this fellow named Ripheus falls too, the most righteous man in Troy, the most devoted to justice. True, but the gods had other plans. How wrong, says the text, to rely on gods dead set against you. And we see the gods. So Venus appears to Aeneas and lifts the veil of sort of normal seeing from his eyes, and he sees the gods themselves helping the Greeks destroy Troy. We even see Priam. This is the most disturbing scene. We see Priam together with his wife Hecuba, and he's donned his armor. He's wearing a, quote, useless sword at his hip. His shoulders are shaking with age. And his wife says, "Are you insane? Poor husband, what impels you to strap that sword on now? Where are you rushing? Too late for such defense, such help. Not even my own Hector, if he came to the rescue now. Come to me, Priam. This altar will shield us all, or else you'll die with us." Their son, Polites, races in, having just escaped slaughter at Pyrrhus' hands. And this Greek named Pyrrhus is hot on his heels. Polites races up to his parents, collapses, and dies at their feet. And then it's this next scene. At that, Priam, trapped in the grip of death, not holding back, not checking his words as his rage. "You," he cried, "you and your vicious crimes. If any power on high recoils at such an outrage, let the gods repay you for all your reckless work. Grant you the thanks, the rich reward you've earned. You've made me see my son's death with my own eyes, defiled a father's sight with a son's lifeblood. You say you're Achilles' son? You lie. Achilles never treated his enemy Priam so. No, he honored a suppliant's rights. He blushed to betray my trust. He restored my Hector's bloodless corpse for burial, sent me safely home to the land I rule." And then Pyrrhus says some insulting things to him. But what's worse, that said, he drags the old man straight to the altar, quaking, slithering on through slicks of his son's blood and twisting Priam's hair in his left hand, his right hand sweeping forth his sword. A flash of steel, he buries it, hilt deep, in the king's flank. It's so awful the way that the noble Priam dies in the temple in front of his wife after he witnesses the death of his son at the hands of this insulting enemy, the son of an enemy that treated him nobly in the end. Then, just 40 lines later, Aeneas encounters Helen, the source of all of this, the curse of Troy and of her native land, says the text. There she lurked, skulking, a thing of loathing, cowering at the altar, Helen. Aeneas nearly kills her, but he's interrupted by, Venus, his mother. Venus is behind both Helen and Aeneas. She's messing up justice with her manipulations. I encourage you to read this scene and witness how Venus acts towards Aeneas and to Helen. She manipulates Aeneas's affection for his family at a crucial moment and turns him away from killing Helen. Venus tells Aeneas to blame the gods and not Helen. And Venus says this is not really the work of human agency and responsibility. And that's when she lifts kind of the fog of his eyes and allows him to see how the gods are fighting on behalf of the Greeks, fighting and tearing down Troy. And she says, there's really not time to kill Helen. There's only time for you to go home and rescue your father and your son and get out of Troy. Creusa, Aeneas' wife, does not want to be parted from him. She says, if you are going to die, she begs, then take us with you too to face the worst together. And so together, this little family leaves Troy. Aeneas is holding his father on his shoulders. His father's name is Anchises. Anchises is being carried on Aeneas' shoulders. Anchises is holding the household gods, the gods of Troy. And Aeneas is holding his son. I called him Ascanius earlier. His name, when he's little, is Iulus. Iulus is about 7. He's holding Iülus by the hand, and Creusa is following them. And as they're making their way, though, out of the city, Creusa is lost. She does not follow. Aeneas turns back to go look for her and is met by her ghost. She tries to console him and says, "The gods forbid you to take Creusa with you. The will of the gods in these things has come to pass." She says that, in fact, she's glad not to become the mistress of a Myrmidon or a Dolpian or a slave to some Greek matron, but rather to just simply die and allow Aeneas to go on to his fate by the Tiber. She says, "And now farewell. Hold dear the son we share, we love together." Yet there's this extremely tender moment that we love Aeneas for, right? He says, 3 times I tried to fling my arms around her neck. 3 times I embraced nothing. Her phantom sifted through my fingers, light as wind, quick as a dream in flight. Gone. And then he says, "Back I went to my people, and I was amazed to see what throngs of new companions had poured in to swell our numbers. Mothers, men, our forces gathered for exile. Grieving masses, they had come from every quarter. Belongings, spirits ready for me to lead them over the sea to whatever lands I'd choose. Since the Greeks had blocked every gate, there was no way to rescue them." And so Aeneas says, "So I gave way at last, and lifting my father, headed toward the mountains." It is interpreted that Aeneas takes with him the past, the tradition, carrying his father on his shoulders, and the future. He draws Iülus forward and holds him by the hand. He's going to form a new union because Creusa, his wife, a symbol of his unity with Troy, has passed away. And he's going to form a new union in a new land and father a new people. So he will be both a continuation and a new shoot, a new plant of Troy. So that image of the 3 of them leaving Troy is extremely moving. You can find paintings and sculptures depicting it. What's disturbing is the lack of justice exerted on Troy by the gods. That, to me, is disturbing. How is it that they can be slaughtered on the very altars of the gods that they served? In Book 1, line 653, there's a quote about the gods who know right from wrong. In light of Book 2, what we've just read and heard about, do they really know right from wrong? What standard is external to the gods? Does Aeneas think that they know right from wrong? I think he thinks they do. But I wonder about Virgil. Is Virgil being ironic? Is Virgil critiquing the gods, even as he holds up Aeneas as an example of devotion? You also may wonder, was it right for Aeneas to escape Troy? I think so. And what made it right? I think what made it right is that it's the only way for Troy to actually continue. It's the only way for Troy to keep living is for Aeneas and his family to escape and to become the new leaders and to found a new Troy in a new land. The only way for Troy to live and to go on is for Aeneas and his family to be the leaders of the new seeds. They are the new seeds from which the new city is going to grow. I think that is how Virgil justifies it. There is something more important than valor in battle, which is what we see emphasized as valuable in the Iliad. What's more important than valor in battle is what the battle serves. And in this case, valorous action serves the good of the people and the life of the people, the flourishing of the people. And leaving is valorous. It's full of valor to leave Troy and to found this new civilization. So the implied argument is that founding a civilization is more important than dying gloriously. I hope you've appreciated getting a little bit psyched about reading the Aeneid. I hope that I've piqued your interest on the characters and some of the main themes and plot points. I am planning to give you another podcast soon on books 3, 4, and 5. Highlights from 3, longer time on book 4 with Dido and Carthage, and a few highlights from book 5. I'm likely to dwell at length on book 6 in a third podcast. Please do download this and share it with other women in your book club, students that you know that are reading the Aeneid, and teachers who are teaching the Aeneid. If anything that I have said here is helpful and you're a student or a teacher or some kind of a scholar, please do give me a footnote. All right, friends, carpe librum.